Good morning, all. I'm here in Whiting Church again for our devotion today. The Israelites continues to be settled down in the new land, which is Canaan area, and it was a blessing that they could reach to the promised land of God and settle down there. And today's chapter, Joshua chapter 21, begins with the story of the Levites, one of the tribes of the Israelites. They were given the land and property according to the promise of God made through Moses a long time ago. And here we need to pay attention today. So the promise, even though the promise was made, the promise of God was made through Moses a long time ago, even Moses already passed away, it was kept and accomplished in the time of today's chapter. It tells us today that, it shows us today that the promise of God is never forgotten, but it's accomplished no matter what, even after a long time. So friends, let us think about the promise of God for us, each of us. What kind of promise has God made for each of you? Has God made a certain promise to you? Has God made any promise, a certain thing to you? Let us think about the promise of God for each of us today. The chapter 21 of the book of Joshua ends with the story that God had kept his promise for the Israelites. Every single promise he exactly, perfectly kept. So verses 44 and 45 say like this: "And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their ancestors. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." That's what today's chapter is saying to us. And that's even happening today for each of us, because God's promise is kept. Friends, God keeps his promise in his time perfectly. No matter what. Yes, we are experiencing pandemic situation, but God keeps his promise perfectly in his time. So that's what we can trust, even in this pandemic situation. God's promise, God's help, God's peace, those are perfect ones. As the verse 44 says like this: "The Lord gave them rest on every side." And verse 45 continues to say, Not one of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. Not single of them had failed. All came to pass. That's the power of God's promise. And that's even valid today. So today, let us take time to think about or pray about what kind of promise God has made for each of us. Then, let us be reminded of God's promise for us, and let us live our lives remembering God's promise on us. Even though it was a long time ago, it's still going on. It's ongoing work. God will accomplish that promise for you in his time. Even after a long time, it will be kept. God never forget his promise for us. So today, let us take time to remember his promise on each of us. God's promise is kept in his timing perfectly. Let us remember that today with the chapter 21 of the book of Joshua. Have a good day.